So let's take a breath together to come into our bodies and give our minds a signal that here we are, this is what we're doing, and to celebrate that. So a very, very warm welcome. I did not get a lot of questions this week, so I will respond to the few questions that I did get. But then I thought we would maybe do something a little bit different and look at one of the close readings together, which I think will be an opportunity then also to reflect on the material and what we've been doing. So so someone asked, sorry, I had it here and then it disappeared. So Lynn, you asked about thinking about writing a memoir, but then not being sure that you were ready to do that and thinking maybe you should write some articles instead. If I think I saw your face here. If you wanted to say more about that, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. And I think that your question will be really helpful for other people as well. Are you here, Lynn? Maybe it was the Lynn here is a different Lynn. So I will read the question aloud then. The question, I've published sociological books, but since the pandemic, I've had a hard time reestablishing a writing routine. At that time, I started to write a memoir, but I'm not sure. Is there a way to tell, short of just trying it on for a while, if I'm still really want to write the memoir? Perhaps I might do better to learn to publish personal narrative essays for journals. So that's a great question. And I think that your answer is embedded in the question, but it's a question a lot of people have. How do you know if you're ready to write a book? Should you write shorter pieces instead? How do you really know what's calling your heart? And I think that the answer is by doing it, as you said. And also, even if you want to write a book, it can be really, really helpful to write shorter pieces along the way. So I always think that writing a book is like running a marathon, and you want to make sure that you can run 5 miles before you're going to run 26 miles or whatever it is. I'm not a marathon runner, but take it in smaller chunks and see what you're enjoying. And sometimes, it takes a while to, especially with memoirs, I think, and I'm saying this because I am back working on my own memoir, that we can do it in fits and starts, and it's nice to have other shorter projects that we can do along the way. So I heard someone say, yes, that's a good question. Does anyone want to jump onto this question and ask about your own processes or your own questions about shorter versus longer pieces?
Can I go?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I started, hi everybody. My name is Wilma. I started about 3 years ago, and I was going to write a memoir. And my mom was going to be, it was going to be like a memoir via my mom in a way, but she was going to be the main person, and then I was going to be the backdrop. And it was so huge. There were like 6 books in her life, and then 3 books in my life, and I never could get my arms around it. So I got discouraged and kind of just stopped. And now what I'm doing is I am writing. I think there's a way and I have read one book that's like this, to write a memoir, but do it from the standpoint of or the platform of short stories. So
Hmm.
maybe maybe my memoir will look like my mom's life or my life, but it'll be a story about, you know, being raised in Kentucky. It'll be a short, quick story, or it'll be about the trip to the well, or it'll be different stories that will all tell a big story, like a book of poetry, like your book in a way. The whole book tells a story if you read it all together, but yet each piece can stand alone.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I haven't gotten anywhere with it, but I can talk about it intellectually, and it feels like something that I can hold in my hand and I can actually maybe do.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And be, because also, just as you're training for a marathon, there are certain things like your body has to learn how to do. As a writer, I think it's helpful to learn how to have beginnings, middle, and ends. It's helpful to learn how to have a voice. It's helpful to learn. And it's something that we don't just learn once. It's like we can learn how to have a voice for one project, but then when we do another project, we need to learn what's the voice for this project? What's the structure for this project? So when you're breaking it down into smaller pieces, you're kind of learning that in the mini, and then you can apply it to the macro. So that sounds like a good idea. And what I've recently done, again, because like I am working on a memoir now, is I had this freedom where all of a sudden I was feeling like a little bit, I didn't realize that I was feeling a little bit tethered to, like, is this true or not? But
Oh,
I had the idea to do it a little bit more as an autofiction. And because I was really like, how is this working on the page? I need to get away from the question of, is it true? And more, how is it bringing the reader from page to page? And so when I no longer needed to have that question of, is it true? I was able to see it with different eyes and cut out the things that weren't important, even if it felt important in my life, but just for the reader to have a pace moving forward. So um, there can be other little tricks that you can do, but you have to be able to see it, especially with memoir, like from your life, but also then get outside of yourself to see how is it just working on the page. Um, so Yeah. I see that Lynn from Philadelphia, you asked that question. So if you want to, and good luck, Wilma, and use this space also to practice, use the prompts for that project and then share it with others and ask for the kind of feedback that would be helpful for you. Lynn from Philadelphia, did you want to unmute yourself and ask any further questions about that?
Yes.
Great.
When I was working on my memoir, I was writing it in snippets, like memories would come to me, and I would write a few pages on that theme, or maybe 2 pages. And I'm not sure that I have an overarching narrative, but rather the snippets I'm writing, and I'm wondering if there's a better way to go about it.
Do you have an overarching question or an overarching, like, what this is about, even if you don't have an overarching narrative?
Yeah, grit and resilience.
Grit and resilience. Um, and is there an overarching, like, turning point?
There's more than one. That's part of why I'm struggling.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Um,
There's like 2 or 3 of those major
mhm.
life-changing events.
Yeah. So I do think it's helpful to, yes, write it out, write it out, write it out, see where the passion is. When we get into later modules, that's more about alignment. That's more looking at the big picture. But since you're asking now, I do think it's helpful at a certain point to kind of have that big picture of shape in your mind so that you're writing towards it. Um, and that can change as you're writing. but I think that writing without a map in the beginning is necessary. But then if you've been at it for a while, then at a certain point, I think you do want a map. And that map again can change, but I would say, like, it sounds like you've been working on this for a while now, right? Yeah. So maybe a good step would be to write some coherent shorter pieces that could stand on their own. And then maybe from that, then the bigger arc of the whole book will come together more.
Thank you. I'm going to
Yeah.
work towards that.
Good luck, and keep us, posted, and use this again, use this space, use the teachings, use the writings to work on this project, and then ask for the kind of feedback you want. Great. Hi, Annie.
Hi. Yeah. So my question, Nadia, as you are writing beginning to write your memoir, when you speak of an overarching writing towards, can you speak from a personal perspective in terms of how you think about your own writing in memoir? Because I think it would be really helpful to make that concrete in my brain in some way.
Normally I would, but I'm actually feeling like very hesitant a little bit of talking about too much about the project, that I'm like, do I even want to be talking about this?
Okay. Maybe an example from another author of memoir or something like that. I don't know if anything comes to mind.
Well, I mean, let's talk about Woman Warrior, because that was the reading for this week, which I think is such a beautiful book, and I highly recommend people read that. And I think it's also a really, really interesting structure. So I think that book, how many of you have read the whole book? Lynn, some of you, Amy, Lisa. So you can add to what I'm saying, but it's a book about an immigrant daughter's relationship to her mom, basically. And so women's stories and the story of, what does her mom carry? What does she learn about her mom? And what's her experience? And then she tells it through different stories. Each chapter could pretty much stand alone, but they really also really build on each other. And they're time jumps. So it's not this, like she can jump in time. And throughout, there's always a question of, is the narration 100% reliable? Right? Here are stories that I shouldn't be telling you, right? That first thing, like, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I'm telling it to you. And so there's a kind of sensationalism. And she has a whole chapter where she tells a whole story, and she says then, well, but that was what my brother said, but he's not really reliable, and he wasn't actually there, because that's what he said that my sister said, but she's not really reliable either. So she's kind of playing with, how do we know what we know? What's our idea of what's true? And so I think that she probably mapped it out. She probably knew what kind of the main themes were, and right from the beginning, from that opening, really, really strong opening that I have in the close readings, it's clear this is going to be about women's stories, and what stories are allowed to be told and what aren't, and what's been buried and what hasn't been buried. So Annie, I don't see your face anymore, but does that answer your question a little bit?
A little bit. And I think what's helpful is your statement of, what stories are women allowed, if this is part of the theme of the book, what stories are women allowed to tell, and from what perspective? And you are addressing the issue related to autobiographical and fiction, right? So, like, because my memory as I write this kind of material, who knows if my memory is accurate, quite honestly. But what I hold is the experience of whatever it is I'm writing about.
Yeah. Do you have questions about, do you want to share a little bit about your own piece, or like what's hard for you to know what the center of it or what the structure of it is, or whatever your question?
Yeah. So for me, the woman, I don't know the name of whoever was speaking, is writing snippets, and that's very much how I see the format. I love Annie Lamott kind of Traveling Mercy style, where there's short story. And so that's kind of how I imagine, if I ever if this ever moves into something that gets consolidated. But the and what also resonated is whoever talked about resilience and rising up, that those are absolutely in the core of the stories that I write, and then the wisdom gained from those experiences. So those are the overarching pieces as I write. And I don't know if that's what you mean in terms of writing towards.
Yes, I think that's definitely helpful to write towards that. So you kind of know what your themes are and then how you can play with them, how they can, each chapter can be a little bit different, because you want each chapter to add something a little bit new, like have a new angle. And then at a certain point, you're going to want to think about, okay, well, what's the organizing structure? Is it chronological? Right. I would say easiest to be chronological if you can be. But then if there's some reason not to be chronological, how else can you organize it?
That's helpful. That question is helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to go into some of the chats a little bit. Lynn says, feminist theorist Monique Wittig says, if in doubt, invent. Yes. There are some other great things here. Patchwork, A Life Among Clothes by Claire Willocks. That's a recommendation. You share recommendations like these in the Circle community as well. It's great. What's the etiquette of using Circle and community threads? Angelica asks. So that's also a good question to bring in now when we're talking about our writing, because so you were, especially for this resistance module, I was encouraging you not necessarily to share your most personal writing, at least at first, so that when you write it, you have that freedom to know that you can really write only for yourself and see what it's like to get that other reader out of your mind. Sometimes we have someone kind of peering over our shoulder all the time without even knowing it. So just to experiment what it's like to be with yourself with your writing. That said, even if you don't want to share your writing, you can go into the Circle group, and the main place to post your questions, maybe I'll even share my screen, just because we haven't done the I don't have it up at the moment, but the main place to post your questions is in the main discussion section. And then there are also the questions, so that if you have a very specific question about the course, either Jenny or I or another student can just come in and answer the question. Then you also have the place to post things you're celebrating and what you're doing. That's also really important to kind of build that muscle. But the main discussion thread is where you post, and you can post about, hey, this is what I noticed in my yoga. This is what I noticed in my meditation. This is what I noticed came up for me when I wrote, but you don't need to share your writing, or you can share your writing. And even if you don't share your writing from the resistance this week, if you later want to share it, you give yourself a little time and then you share it. We're all really accomplished adults here. So everything that I offer is a suggestion, and it's really a place for you to do what's right for you. Some people choose not to engage in the community at all, and I really want to trust their own, process of having their writing be a kind of self-guided retreat. That's totally fine also. Just to say, you know what, I have a lot of community in my life. I want to see what it's like to do this without community. Some people do that for a few months and then come into the community, or a year and then do the community the next year. So Angelica, do you want to unmute yourself and ask more specifically what your question might be about how to use the Circle? But I do think it's an opportunity in that space to really practice with feeling what's right for you in terms of what you're sharing, what you're not sharing, and the kind of feedback that you're asking for.
Okay, well, so far, I feel like what I've been using it for is reflecting on the process as I'm going through the prompts, not really adding what I've been writing based on the prompts. And I felt a little unsure if I guess I was using it the way I felt worked for me, but I'm not sharing my actual writing yet, is what how I've been using it. But I do think at some point I would like to start sharing my writing to get some feedback, and I also find that in some ways, I think this is something that we have discussed in the circle. In some ways, the prompts I'm using almost like a sketchbook, and articulating ideas in a way that the prompt sort of suggests to me. And then I've been going back to my own long-term writing project and using some of those tools or skills in that. So I haven't been directly writing the pieces that I'm working on from the prompts, but I don't know. I mean, I think that part I feel comfortable with, but the when to share and what to share is the part that I'm struggling a little bit. And it makes a lot of sense to me what you're saying about this module and trying to get those voices out.
Yeah. It sounds like you're doing everything exactly right. And I think that, you know, using the prompts to kind of see what comes up, but then maybe it's not 100% obvious how the prompts are going into your writing project, but I bet they are in some way, even if it's not a one-to-one, you know? And so sometimes it's really, really nice to be told what to do and like, this is what you should do it. And I think I just tend to be a little bit more in that uncomfortable space where I'm like, you know what, you actually have freedom in choosing what you do. So be curious about what feels right to you. And the assignment is more to listen to yourself and choose. So I think that what you're doing sounds like it's working and you're listening to yourself. And when you're ready, you'll post your writing. But I think for everyone who's, you know, listening, it's really like, well, are there certain patterns that I'm doing over and over again? Am I always not sharing my writing? Is that I'm doing because that's really what's working for me? Or is that an old pattern, an old habit that maybe I don't need anymore? You know? And so to be self-reflective about that. And, you know, you can even post about that. Like, hey, I've noticed that I'm really resistant to sharing my writing here. I wonder why that is. And something might come up. Or it might be, you know what, like in certain times in my own writing, I'm like, you know, I really actually just want to write it. I want to get it on the page. And I know that it's going to be helpful for me to get feedback later, but I actually don't want to stop and get that feedback now. And I know that that's actually right for me at this time in my process. So yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm a little bit, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there. I always want to be doing right by a group as well as for myself, and maybe I'm focused too much a little bit on that. But thank you. That helps a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's also really interesting to think about, you know, when you're in the group and you're like, why is this person doing this or this person doing that? To really come with a good sense of trust that people are doing. Everyone in the group is generous, sincere, and here to support one another. And so that gives you then the flexibility to do what's right for you and to know that people trust that you're letting them do what's right for them and they'll let you do what's right for you, and that it doesn't need to be the same for everybody. So Stephanie, I see your hand. I'm going to come to you in 1 minute, but I see that Kate says that you're far behind. Wonder if you should say which module you're posting for. And Tish says also, yeah, lots of people are behind. you don't need to think about it being behind. You can think about it as saying, you know, you're going at the pace that's right for you. We have catch-up weeks. We'll have another coaching session in July for some more catch-up. You can continue, have lifelong access to all the teachings. So if you want to post what module your response is for, you can, but you don't need to. I think it's almost, I was thinking about kind of ideal teaching, and whether an ideal teaching situation would be that everyone would start at the same time and it would be a program that we'd all start together and all end together, or whether it would be staggered, whether people would kind of come in at different times. And I was thinking that something might be nice about having almost a staggered approach, because if everyone's starting together and then ending together, there's this fallacy that we're all supposed to be at the same place at the same time. Where in reality, everyone starts in a different place, even if we start at the same time, this course at the same time. And we all have different kind of rhythms and speeds and other things in our lives. So I think it's nice I sometimes think about like a group of people singing. If you do like an om with a big group of people and everyone takes a breath at a different time, but you have that consistency, that it's okay that people are going through this at different speeds, at different patterns. If you want to just like meet us here, you could really start with any of the modules. I have definitely designed it with a progression. But if you're like, just really want like, oh, I haven't done 1 and 2, I'm just going to jump to module 3, or I'm just going to jump to module 4, that's also okay. And you can go back later. So again, allow yourself to trust your own timing. Yeah. Stephanie.
Hey, Nadia. Just want to say, first of all, thank you for this course, and I've been really enjoying it. My question is, so part of why I took this course is wanting to write about some childhood events. And so I completely agree with you just have to write it out. But what I'm feeling some dissonance with is when I'm writing from like my point of view as a child, and then just not bringing in any adult wisdom or how to merge those two things. Because I feel like right now it's lots of snippets like other people, but it's very like observatory, and there's not that deeper wisdom that have. And I guess I'm just not really sure if you have any advice or wisdom on how to merge those two things in the actual writing. It's not, I mean, it's sort of a linear writing that I'm doing, but it's also goes in and out a little bit just because like the rhythm and pace that I'm feeling it out with. So that's my question. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. And I guess I have a few different responses. One is there's a lot of great writing that just kind of shows what was happening, but by being able to show it, like to show it clearly, and that you're going to see things now that you just couldn't see as a child. Even if the voice is that child's voice, there are details, there's descriptions that just that child doesn't have. And so, in a lot of memoirs, we can feel that it's a successful memoir because we feel that the writer has processed the mixed experiences. And if they haven't, you somehow feel that it hasn't been processed. And that doesn't necessarily need to be said explicitly. I think the reader kind of just has a sense. I don't know quite how it happens, but like if there's no setting of the scene. If you know for example, say someone's screaming at the child, and the child at the time thinks she's done something really wrong. I'll just wait a moment.
Sorry.
No worries. And you could describe that scene in a way so that you're really showing that the child hasn't done anything wrong, and that it's the parents or the adults, whoever it is, who are having a problem. You can kind of show the problem that the adult is having. And then you can still show that the child feels that they've done something wrong, but the reader will know, have that adult perspective, which is very different, because the child probably would just have the say the yelling and then the feeling I've done something wrong, but wouldn't be able to see the larger context of like what was happening with that adult, where that kind of yelling came from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm also struggling with like information. So there's like information that I know as an adult, and there's information I didn't know as a child. And I'm struggling with, do I just tell it in the child's perspective, which is kind of what I'm hearing? Or do I add in, I know now as an adult that of course that can't, like, that isn't how it is or something, but at that, and it's like, that doesn't feel like the right thing to write. Like when I'm in the moment, it doesn't feel like pulling myself out and having this other perspective. Like, so I don't know how to have real information. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
real places. I don't know, like the Woman Warrior, it's very like, I just started it. I haven't gotten very far, but it's like, I'm not sure so far, like what is real and what's not real. And for me personally, I want it to be like my personal truth. And so I'm just struggling with that. Like, do I make notes? Like, note, this is actually, I don't know. It's just, it's starting to get a little confusing. So
I think, I mean, that would be that. I haven't seen books that do that, but that would be almost interesting, right? I mean, it could be like, you could invent a form that did that. There could also be, when did you start to learn more? And your process of learning more could be part of the book as well. And then you could also, one thing that Woman Warrior does, it is kind of has a telling voice sometimes. So you could also be narrating the story to someone, and then you as a narrator could come in and actually say, of course now I know blah, blah, blah. Which at the time I didn't. You can also give background information that you know now that you as a child didn't know in the descriptions. So I would say, experiment with it in different ways. I think that it sounds to me like it might be helpful for you in the process to write out what you do know now, even if it might come across in a different way in a final form. But it sounds like that juxtaposition between this is what it was then and this is what I know now. I mean, that could even be an interesting essay or piece, a standalone piece. This is what I thought then. This is what I know now. This is what I thought then. This is what I know now. To kind of have that structure.
okay, that makes sense. Thanks, Nadia.
So, I mean, again, it's not like a one answer, but I would say play with it in different ways, but also then look at different memoirs that you like and see how are they handling it. Where we get to both have that experience of the child, but also have that a bigger perspective.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks, Nadia.
And share your work, and ask for feedback with the specific pieces. it's a big question, you know, and again, like something that I've needed to work with a lot in my as I'm trying to write my piece, and like where am I going to put information. And I just made a change so that I was doing it chronologically. I'm like, I'm not going to do it chronologically. I'm going to take a lot of the information that I kind of was telling chronologically and put it in the middle, because at the time, things that like now I know were really important, I didn't think were really important. So if I give them a lot of weight as they were unfolding, then it's kind of telling the reader too much, like, oh, this is really important. I'm going to kind of tell it later, like, oh, actually, this and this and this, and when those things happened, that was actually important, even though at the time I didn't know it was important. So, yeah. Thank you. I see Elizabeth has a hand raised.
Hi, Nadia. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. I had posted a question in the wrong place. I think you had made a note. And it was about footnotes. And it's basically a much bigger question than that. It's as I'm writing, and I have been writing the story of my great-grandaunt, who was an artist in Santa Fe in the 1920s. I never knew her. I have lots of her art and pictures of her art. And so I started the process of researching chronologically and writing her story chronologically, but there were huge pieces that were missing. And so what I've played with during this course, which has been really helpful, and I'm getting a better feel that this isn't teaching a person how to be a writer. This is teaching a person how to be a person on the page. And I think that I'm finally getting that, because I was like, well, okay, wait, what person, first person, second person? I've never taken a writing course in my life. I majored in musical theater. And so learning, learning how to like overarching frame and all these conceptual things that are just in your talking and sharing has been very, very helpful. And I'm left with more questions than I am answers. And that's like, oh my gosh. So I'm using the prompts, like the hard thing. I shared my writing in the community scene because Dorothy was a lesbian. And so that was, how was I going to introduce that piece? And then this a huge part of her entire life was documented in letters between her partner, she and her partner. And it's in Santa Fe. There were a lot of other artists. There's a lot of truth. There've been a lot of things written about Santa Fe. So I don't want to make stuff up. I don't want to be in that position. So I'm getting somewhat frustrated, and I can see that I could probably stand to have a coach, like a one-on-one for this particular project. To have another person kind of look at it from that perspective, not a fact-checking perspective, but one of, wow, this has some movement now. This wants to keep me reading instead of getting mired down in details about the area or the history of time or all of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure what your question is, but I guess what I would want to say is like, there's a lot, right? Writing a book is a lot, and there's a lot of information in this course, and you said you haven't studied writing before, so it's an iterative process. And I think for even really, really, really experienced writers, it's an iterative process, right? Like, and starting a new project. So I would say just keep working through the materials of the course, because they're going to give you a lot of tools and it might feel overwhelming at first. And then, yeah, it can be helpful to work with a coach, but I think you'll get more of those tools and have a better time working with a coach if you do this process first. And then you can come through the process again also, and it will, sometimes people say, oh, the second time I come through, I see things, or I have a new understanding that I didn't have the first time. So,
I was likening it to a non-yoga person doing the exercises. And I'm a yoga teacher, so all the stuff that you've been presenting us makes perfect sense to me because I have the history of doing yoga. But so a lot of the things that you're asking, or that the course is designed to do, they're not like going to a writing course where they say, this is the kind of you're going to write this. And you're actually asking us to listen to our own voice or our own souls and write. When the majority of my writing has been writing in a journal my whole life.
But that's great. I mean, I think this is great questions because, that's writing in a journal, that's writing.
Yeah.
You've written in a journal your whole life. And I think what's different also about writing from other forms is that we all are language users. We're all native language users. We don't all paint. We don't all play an instrument, but we all use language and we all tell stories. We all communicate. So I think it's a little bit different. Yes, maybe you haven't written in this way before, but you've actually been writing, you said, in your journal your whole life. So it's I think trusting that you have those tools. Someone can tell you do X, Y, and Z, ABC, but it's kind of like writing, I don't know, like a lot of the writing that comes from that is kind of like a cardboard box. It's not really deep writing instead of tapping into what you actually already have within you. That said, it might be helpful to write some shorter pieces because, as I was saying, to Lynn and earlier, your first big writing project being a book is a lot, to maybe write an essay about her. See if there are a few essays you can write. Maybe there's a personal essay you can write about why you're doing this project, that kind of thing. So again, if people are feeling like, oh, I have this big book idea, see if you can break it into something smaller first.
That's helpful. Yes, thank you. And the prompts have been helpful to take chapters and just say, oh, let me look at it from this perspective. So I've been able to do that, and it has been very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I see lots of messages that I'm not all keeping up with. So let me just see. Is there anyone else with a raised hand? Let me just see. I can't, for some reason, let me remove my spotlight. Oh, Sandra, hi.
So I've loved this discussion. This is my second time going through the course, and in actuality, I have not looked at anything, but I came to the session because I wanted to talk about how wonderful this was for me. So everybody's been talking about, writing and is this true? Is this not? But I think what you did for me, Nadia, in your course was to validate my writing as therapy. That's what it starts for me. It starts from a place like that. One of your prompts led me to write a whole short story, which I've recently submitted. I haven't gotten it accepted, one rejection yet, but okay, only a couple places. But at any rate, I think that's where we have to start. I was a professional dancer, your yoga and all of that, and the somatics and getting into our bodies and not being afraid to just write what is right there for us. Not thinking and not judging yet, just get it down. And this last story started with a prompt. I think it was winter before whatever. I'm sure you remember. And it took me months to write it. I actually was writing it with a friend because it was a memoir. And I also wanted to talk about that sometimes I think of memoir as creative nonfiction. It's kind of true, but you're getting it more
poetic, or you're maybe bending the truth a little bit. Or when I did that, I found out so many things about myself and about the process. It didn't picture me in the greatest light. It was a story where I did some shitty things, but I also learned from it. And that's what I find this course to be about. You know, it's the best. And so I wanted to thank you for that.
Oh,
And
thank you.
snippets. I love the idea of the snippets. That's what I've done. I've had 3 little, almost flash fiction stories published, not paid or anything, but they started with just ideas about who I was and what I experienced in my life. And the idea that through that process, I was changed somehow.
Hmm.
And that's what made that all work. But thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. And I love that you use the word change, because, you know, it's like, what's the change? That's the other thing everyone can ask, like, what's the change? What's the change agent? What's going to keep the reader turning the page? And what's keeping you turning the page? And where is something shifting? It doesn't always need to shift for the better. Something can shift and change and like, oh no, and now all of a sudden there's this new problem, right? But just to be like, what's alive? What's moving? Where's the movement? How do you follow the movement? So for everyone just thinking about your own work, what's keeping the story moving in you, right? So it's not just a stagnant thing, which I think if we go back to these, you know, close readings, Woman Warrior, Push, like, what's that agency? What's that life force behind the telling of these stories? And then I love what you said, that, you know, it was therapeutic for you, but I think that, again, using both Push and Woman Warrior, those pieces are both kind of therapeutic stories, women figuring out who they are.
Exactly.
One is a memoir, one is a novel, but it's written as a memoir. And someone asked, what is autofiction? So autofiction is fiction that's based on the author's life. And in other countries, like, I'm very influenced by French women writers, but if you go into a French bookstore, they don't have a memoir section and fiction section. They're just all together. They don't actually even make that distinction, which is kind of amazing and lovely. But behind, so I guess what I was trying to say, I lost my train of thought, but what I was wanting to say was that therapeutic writing and writing that's really great for other people to read, they don't need to be different. Often there's like, oh, therapeutic writing, that's not for anyone else. That's just for you and your journal, and you don't need to work hard at it, and it can just be like finger paint that you mush around. No. The most therapeutic writing can be writing that's most crafted, that we get the most out of crafting it, out of shaping it, out of figuring out like how to make it so that we both see that child's perspective and the adult perspective, that they can be together on the page, you know? That's an artistic question. It's also a therapeutic question, I think. And so that the reading experience can be both artistic and therapeutic for the reader. And that's what I'm trying to share, like pieces that I think are doing that. So, and it sounds like, you know, again, like it's therapeutic for you, but then you're also sharing it with others. So
I just wanted to say one more comment to those of you who are struggling or thinking about a book. Eventually, I'd like to take these memoirs and make a book out of them. And I have a tentative title or a theme even. But what I wanted to say was that just writing the short little things is much more manageable. I'm retired. It's not my second career, but it's my passion and therapy. So writing short is much easier than trying to think, oh, I've got to get this book done before I die. You know? So anyway, just wanted to share that. And
thank you so much.
Connections. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I see Christine, you have your hand up too.
Hi, sorry, I have to unmute, and I apologize for not having a camera. It's broken.
No worries.
And I want to go on my phone, but then everyone's so little. So anyways, this is I just wanted to share that I've done a lot of classes with you in different retreats and things like that. And it is the process that really, if we stick with it, that really helps us to grow and change and have a different perspective constantly. And so I just really appreciate all that you offer. And then this class, I finally thought, I've done all this stuff. I really should jump jump in and do this. And it has been really great. And I love the pace at which I can do it, which is regular. I'm really committed to it. So that's awesome too. But it's I don't feel that pressure if I am really into something, that I can just kind of stick with that for a little bit and then jump back. So I like that. But I wanted to say too, I've been reading Unearthing, and I don't know if you recommended that or a different source, but Unearthing is a memoir that is written, like some of the chapters are less than like it's a paragraph or a sentence. I mean, but it's so beautifully written, and I have just read it and reread it because there's so much in it. So I'll put that in the group thing so that people can look for that. But it's called Unearthing by Kyo McClear, and
Great.
yeah, a very different memoir than other memoirs that I read as I prepared to do my writing and as I continue to learn from other writers too.
Thank you. Yeah, I always say, and I'll talk more about this later in the course, but to find those model texts, which is why I always teach from other texts. And, you know, again, if you like something, learn from it. Maybe you'll like something, you'll be like, I love this, but it's not what I do. That can also help you figure out what you can do. And if you don't like something, learn from not liking it also. But then, you know, I'll share this chat as well in the recording, but you can use the circle space also to share recommendations with one another. I think someone suggested that earlier in the course, and I said, let's not overwhelm people yet, but I can even open a new kind of space where people can share recommendations, because it's great to do that. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and maybe if people are sharing it, they can also just share a sentence or two so that if there's a lot of recommendations, people can know where they might start instead of.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I'm sharing this. This is what it is, and this is what I liked about it. Thank you. Jacqueline.
Yeah, just getting myself all arranged here. I'm really liking the course this time through. I loved it the last time through, but this time I'm more relaxed with the process, and that I don't have to really accomplish a whole lot. I just have to sit down and write, and then I throw it onto the onto the conversation area. But one of the things in this conversation here, and I really like it because it's talking about that whole problem about you've got a book, you've got a memoir, you've got a snippet, where does it all go? And I've been working on this damn book for well, since before the pandemic. And I couldn't get it to move until I found this Rachel Herron said, well, you can write this thing in 90 days. And since at that time I was writing it with a friend who was getting equally as antsy, it was like, okay, we'll do that. But the idea of a plan, when I was in high school, I had to write plans, and I wasn't going to pass unless I had a plan, but I didn't know how to write a plan. So I'd write the story, and then I'd write the plan, and then they didn't know the difference. But this time I kind of had to move it. And what I found with this was I really liked the Rachel Herron book, because it did force me into a structure. And then I came across your course, which said, well, now it sort of has to align with who you are, which it wasn't. And so but it was useful to have the structure, because then I had, basically it was like little drawers I could stuff things into. And then what I found with the course this time through, and I really appreciate it, it's like, oh, I'm stuck here. Well, we'll just try some of these prompts, and some of them kind of give the key to what you were talking about. Where's the movement? Where's the life? And it's like, oh, okay, I can go in, and then I can take some of these things, and I just sort of stuff them in. and that's, well, that's a project for later on. I've also dropped the idea that I'm going to finish it in 90 days or 90 years. So,
Oh, you're going to finish it.
but it's nice to take it off, that it's okay to be in revision. That whole timeline thing, I have to make this deadline, which was just too, it's like, well, the story has its own feel, and somewhere out there, if I do all this stuff, it will come together. So I'm appreciating the course. I love it. So
Good. Thank you so much. And I just want to say again, like all of these different things, all of these different practices, they're iterative. So it can be helpful to have a plan, but then you have to get rid of the plan and come into alignment with yourself. Then you have to come back into the plan. Then you have to come back into alignment until finally they're kind of like together. So similarly, don't have a deadline. The deadlines can be frustrating and kind of not helpful. And then at a certain point, it's like, okay, you need a deadline. This isn't going to get finished unless there's a deadline. So any advice, the opposite is also true. And it's a matter of kind of like, okay, here are all the different tools. The tools that say don't have a deadline, do have a deadline. They're both true. And you need to then discern how do you use both of them. When is it time to let go of the deadline? When is it time to actually say, here's a deadline? So that's something we'll talk more about at the end of the course, which maybe you remember, but at the end of the course, we do talk about finishing your pieces, because I do want people to finish, and deadlines can be really helpful for finishing. So again, there will be more, just for everyone who hasn't been through the course yet, there will be more about how to bring the different snippets, the different pieces of your story together in the alignment, and then also how to actually get to the finish line. And there might be some teachings where you're not quite ready for those teachings yet, right? Like, I'm not ready for the finish line. So that's why I also like to give lifetime access. Okay, at a certain point, you'll come to them, and then you can come back when you're ready for that finish line. So yeah, thank you. Jara, and then maybe this will be the last question for today, and we'll just come together and then go into breakout rooms, because I heard from last week that people wanted a little longer in the breakout rooms. Hi, can you unmute yourself?
There we go.
Perfect.
So my question is, I'm wanting to put together a little chapbook of poetry, and I don't know how to plan for that. So I'm assuming that there, has to be some planning involved for that, just as well as any other project. Can you give me any pointers on that?
Well, so are you thinking like, I guess my question is there a theme that your poems circle around?
Well, there'll probably be a few themes. I thought I would probably have, I thought I would have a few sections that would be designated to themes.
And then do those sections, are they interrelated in some way?
That's a good question. Not necessarily. Is that all right?
It's all right. You might want to think about, okay, if this is a book, what's the reader's experience of reading through the books? How do poems in one section interact with poems in another section? Okay. If you have poems on different themes, there are also different ways you can do that. You can have them in different sections, or you can kind of weave them together. That can make, here, but might be, if you're thinking, I used to write poems really as one-offs. Like, there's this poem, there's this poem. I wanted the poems to stand alone. And I think a lot of the poems that I read were kind of like that. I read a lot of older poetry, not contemporary poetry, so I wasn't really so much reading it in books. You don't read like a book of Keats's poems exactly. You read Keats's poems. But on the other hand, then you look at it, you're like, well, he has these poems that kind of go together. He has these long poems. So then you can start to think, well, what do I want the reader's experience to be?
Okay.
What journey do I want to guide the readers through? And it doesn't need to be a journey
So
from
it could
you
be
know, Alabama to Timbuktu, but it can be a kind of
yeah. I'm thinking
like
maybe chronological, sort of a
Mhm.
bit of a chronological order, because some of my poems are about you know, my childhood experience, and then of course more
Mhm.
become more and more present to the present day, that is. Hopefully they're all present. But okay, so that, yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Great.
I'll go for that. And I just want to say that I'm sorry, but I won't be able to stay for the group today. Thank
Great.
you.
Good to have you here. Those of you who have to go, it's great, great having you here. If you can stay, please do stay. And I just want to come back to the question of resistance a little bit. We had a lot of great conversation, and I think these questions, again, we'll talk about more. I think these questions are more the ones that I address more in the alignment section of the course. But of course, you know, you're working on something, so you want to know how to work on it now. But I really want to just come back before we go into the breakout rooms to this question of, here we are, a group of women, and we haven't really talked today about what your own experience has been of working with the resistance module and with reading these pretty difficult stories about women's bodies, about women's voices, about what was silenced. And I wonder, before we go into the breakout rooms, maybe we could just have a few-minute conversation about, you know, how did that resonate with you? Do you think that the sources of your writing also in part come from a place of, you know, what hasn't been free to be shared? Otherwise, is there some energy in your own writing between kind of what's been silenced and what's being given voice, and how does that play out for you? And does thinking about it in those terms help you unlock parts of your own writing? Are there things that you've noticed working with this module that have helped you come into something maybe with some different perspective? Joyce, I see your hand.
Hi,
Hi.
everybody. Yeah, this is my first time with the course material, and I'm learning a lot about how to process my emotions as I write. And this resistance module was very challenging for me. I had a really hard time listening to the even listening to the readings. I'm kind of a kind of person that I'll start reading a book, if it gets too violent or too painful or bloody, I just have to put it down. And I'm like that with movies and everything. So in this module, I've learned that I just, like Nadia says, just be gentle with yourself. When you're ready to put it down, it'll come. And it has resulted in me being able to write about some very painful things about my life, but also that acknowledgement that it's okay if you're sensitive to some of the material, and it's okay if you're resistant. You just don't push it. That's the comment I wanted to make.
I really appreciate your sharing that. I'm sure you're not alone. I can't watch violent movies, especially if they're supposed to be like entertainment. So I just think you're not alone with that, and I really think it's important for us to kind of like acknowledge, you know, this is hard material that I've been sharing with you, and take it gently. Take your responses seriously, honor them, take the time you need. And we're moving to joy next week. Sometimes people have a challenge with, often people have a challenge with that as well. But you know, this is about just really gently noticing, expanding, and making space for, and also knowing that we are together in this. Each of us is different. And yet those things that might, so often those things that we think, God, this is weird. Is anyone else like this? There are so many other people who have similar, not exactly the same responses. So if you have any kind of response to any of the material that you think, is this the wrong response or is this an unusual response? I would almost guarantee you that someone else has something somewhat similar. And thank you for, sharing your own responses. So thank you. Leslie.
I just wanted to make a comment about the resistance module, and I have found it extremely helpful in kind of processing stuff that's happened to me even, years ago, that keep coming, blurting out into your brain every once in a while, even though you don't really deal with it right now. And I find it even more engaging the second time around, because I'm good at kind of coming around to the good side, the resolute, this is what happened, this is where it is now. And it's I don't know that I would have ever done it if I hadn't written it.
Yeah. And then do you feel different having written it? Like, is there having gone back into those spaces that you might not have gone back to, did anything shift? Did anything open?
Totally. Totally. I just think it made me much more open and accepting and not so judgmental. And for me, that's a good place. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that. I had a question from someone who's going through the course the first time saying, I took this course and I'm not sure she got to the resistance module yet, because I always tell people take your time, but I took this course to really write about my own story and you're just having me like free write and I want to go into the meaty stuff. And I leave the resistance module to the third. I feel like, you can jump ahead here, but also I feel like we have to come to our difficult things slowly with gentleness, building up trust with ourselves, building up trust with our voice, building up trust with the process, with the community that we're in. I once, years ago, was having some health issues and like really having some weird experiences. And I went to a therapist and she was like, so what does it feel like? What does it feel like when you're right in the middle of it? And I was just like, I don't know you. Like, I'm not going to tell you that. Like, I never went back. And then it was years later that I realized, like, oh, I actually did have to answer that question. But I needed to have a relationship with the person before they could ask me that. Like, that was just not good therapy. So my hope is that, like we build this relationship with ourselves. I mean, it took me decades to be able to ask myself that question, well, what actually was happening when that was happening to me, that to build that safety. So, okay. Thank you all so much. Is there anyone else who wants to say something to the whole group or answer anything respond to the question that I had asked or the module before we go into breakout rooms? Then let's go into breakout rooms, and I will give you more time in the breakout room this week. Let's just do a quick vote. So it's 1:10, so I can give you 20 minutes in the breakout room, and I think I'll do it in groups of 3 or 4 people. Depending on like the numbers, so you get to know each other. And my invitation to you is introduce yourselves to one another, share what you're working on in the course, where you are, any questions that you have that are coming up for you in your writing in relationship to your writing. And also maybe you could share again your aspirations for the course, your intentions, that might be helpful. And then, get to know one another. People really enjoyed it last time and wanted more time. So what we could do is I could give you like 18 minutes and then we could come back together for the last 2 minutes. Or I could just give you, here's the breakout room and take 15, 20 minutes together. But if you want to go longer, you can. And then you can close out the rooms yourselves. let's just have a quick informal vote. If you would prefer that we all come back together in about 17, 18 minutes, raise your hand if you can. Okay, I don't know how I'm exactly going to do this, but if you prefer that we don't come back together and you just kind of, your group decides when you want to end, raise your hand for that. I see fewer hands. So I think we should come back together. So let's open the rooms and then we'll come back together a little before 1:30. Okay. If you need to go, please go now so that I don't put you in a group and then the group is too small. If you have to go, thank you so much. We love being with you. But if you don't have to go, please stay because people really do enjoy these groups a lot. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording. So welcome back, everyone. Renee, are you okay with my just repeating a little bit of what you said?
Sure.
That you said that you were writing about something difficult, the passing of your son, and my heart goes out to you, especially as a mother. And that you found yourself kind of wanting to write about your ex-husband, but you didn't really want to. You didn't want to give that attention. You wanted to give it to other places.
Exactly.
So I think that little dance, though, that happens where we don't want to give it attention, but it's coming up anyway, it's there in our bodies. So that sometimes by writing about it a little bit in a very supported way,
Okay.
can actually make it come up in our bodies a little bit less.
Okay.
But again, I really think you should listen to what feels right to you.
Okay.
But sometimes just putting it on the page, be like, oh, even if you're not on the page, you're in my psyche still.
I hate that. Yeah.
So yeah. So
Yeah.
sometimes, putting it there on the page can actually free up space in the psyche.
Well, and then I'm definitely finding that with writing about Ryan and my son, and just to get it on paper and get it out and tell my story and tell his story really is therapeutic. And then my ex, I guess I can give him a little bit.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Thank you. And we're here to support you.
Thank you.
And I think there are other women here who have lost, I know there are other women who are writing also about losing their sons. So I don't know if you've connected, but we have lots of people who have similar experiences.
Okay. Thank you.
Whether it's your experience or other people writing about illness or whatever it is. So thank you and sending love. Christine and Lorraine, I see your hands. I do actually need to go. We're over time, but I just wanted to come back together and see how your breakout rooms were. I know we could go on and on. There's so much to talk about. I love talking to you all. So just very quickly, maybe if you can just sum up, just come back together. Maybe I'll ring the singing bowl. But if anyone, Christine and Lorraine, if you wanted to say something that was pressing, please unmute yourself and let us know.
Well, it's not pressing, so and you have to go. But I just wanted to say, well, I had a great chat, but more. I just wanted to share that this weekend I'm from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, and I just wanted to share that this weekend we had a literary festival here in Trinidad, and I spent the weekend listening to amazing authors, and I discovered somebody who's apparently a rock star that I never knew about. Somebody called Edwidge Dandycat. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Yeah. And it's always amazing as a big reader when you discover somebody that you have never read. So I just wanted to share her name with you all and say, because she talks also about difficult things. She has a book called The Art of Death that I've promptly bought. And so I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. That sounds amazing. I really like her work. And that's also, I'll open up that space and circle that people can share enthusiasms. That would be a great way to continue the conversation. Thank you all. I hope you had a really, really nice time with one another in the breakout rooms. Maybe just put up your thumbs. Let me know how it went. Nice. I will ring the singing bowl and let's take a breath together. Thank you all again so much. I look forward to being with you next week. Tomorrow I'll release the next module. Again, though, go at your own pace. It's not a race. And we're all here to support one another. So keep the conversation going. Thank you all. Bye. Be so well.